Good evening all and welcome back to Untold Fears. Canada stretches across nearly 10 million square kilometers of wilderness, forests, and forgotten towns where the cold is not the only thing that can kill you. From the rugged coasts of British Columbia to the frozen prairies of Manitoba, this vast nation holds secrets that authorities would rather keep buried in case files gathering dust. Tonight, we are bringing you 10 true stories that reveal what happens when ordinary Canadians encounter the darkness that lurks in the spaces between civilization and the unknown. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Untold Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of the Great White North, where the temperature drops. Help is hours away, and terror begins. I need to tell someone about what happened to my brother Marcus in October of 2018 because the RCMP closed the investigation and nobody in my family is the same anymore. We are falling apart, and the worst thing is knowing that Marcus is still out there somewhere while everyone else has moved on like he never existed. I am 34 years old now, work as a forestry technician for the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, and I have spent the last 6 years searching for answers that nobody else seems to care about finding. Marcus was my younger brother by 3 years, the kind of guy who could fix anything with duct tape and wire, who knew every back road and logging trail in northern Ontario like they were extensions of his own driveway. He worked as a hunting guide near Thunder Bay, taking American tourists into the bush every fall, and he loved that life more than anything. We were close in the way brothers who grow up in rural Canada are close, the kind where you do not talk every day, but you know the other person would drive 8 hours through a blizzard if you needed them. Our family had owned a cabin on Lake Nipigon for 3 generations, about 2.5 hours northwest of Thunder Bay, accessible only by a rough logging road that turned into mud soup every spring. The cabin itself was nothing fancy, just a 2-room structure with a wood stove, propane lights, and a hand pump for well water, but it was ours. Every October, Marcus and I would take a week off and head up there for what we called our annual brothers trip, just the 2 of us, fishing for lake trout and walleye, drinking beer around the fire, and pretending we were still kids who did not have mortgages and responsibilities waiting back home. That tradition had been going on for 12 years straight without missing a single season. October 2018 started like all the others. I drove up from Sault Ste. Marie, where I was living at the time, picked Marcus up at his place in Thunder Bay on October 14th, a Sunday, and we made the drive out to the cabin. The weather forecast called for cool nights and clear days, perfect fishing weather. Marcus seemed normal that first day, maybe a bit quieter than usual, but I figured he was just tired from a busy guiding season. We unpacked our gear, got the wood stove going, and headed out on the lake for a few hours before dark. The fishing was decent, nothing spectacular, and we came back as the sun was setting, that particular orange light you only get in October when the leaves are turning and the air smells like wood smoke and pine needles. That first night, we cooked our fish over the fire and sat outside wrapped in wool blankets, talking about nothing important, the way you do when you're comfortable with someone. Marcus mentioned he had been seeing someone, a woman named Sarah, who taught at one of the elementary schools in Thunder Bay, and he thought it might be getting serious. I remember thinking he seemed happy when he talked about her, that maybe my little brother was finally going to settle down. Around 11, we turned in, him taking the pull-out couch and me in the loft, like always. I fell asleep to the sound of the lake lapping against the rocky shore and wind moving through the jack pines. The next morning, Monday, October 15th, things started feeling off. I woke up around 7 to find Marcus already awake, standing at the window overlooking the lake with a cup of coffee just staring out at the water. When I asked if he was okay, he jumped a little, like I had startled him, then said he was fine, just could not sleep well. His eyes had this distant quality, like he was looking at something I could not see. We went out fishing again, and that is when I noticed he kept checking over his shoulder, scanning the tree line along the shore, like he expected to see something there. When I asked him about it, he brushed it off, said he thought he heard an ATV the night before and was worried about trespassers. That made sense. We had problems with people coming onto the property over the years, so I did not push it. But throughout the day, Marcus got more and more agitated. He insisted we move the truck from where we normally parked it near the cabin to a spot hidden behind a stand of spruce trees about 50 yards away. He kept saying something about not wanting people to know we were there, that we should keep a low profile. I thought maybe he had gotten into some kind of trouble, maybe owed someone money, or had a bad breakup I did not know about. But when I tried to talk to him about it, he shut down completely. That evening, instead of relaxing, he spent an hour walking the perimeter of the property, checking all the trails that led back to the logging road. He found fresh tire tracks on one of them, said they were recent, maybe from that morning. The tracks were from a full-size pickup. Nothing unusual for that area since hunters and loggers use those roads all the time, but Marcus acted like it was a threat. Tuesday morning, I woke up to find him sitting at the table with our grandfather's old topographic map spread out, tracing routes with his finger. He had marked several paths through the bush, including one that led northeast toward a series of old mine exploration sites from the 1960s. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was just looking at options for getting out if the logging road got washed out, which happened sometimes during heavy rain, but we had checked the weather, and there was no rain in the forecast. I was starting to get genuinely worried now. This was not the Marcus I knew. My brother was calm, practical, someone who dealt with problems head-on, not someone who acted paranoid and secretive. That afternoon, things got stranger. We were supposed to go fishing again, but Marcus insisted we stay at the cabin. He kept watching the trail from the front window, and around 3 in the afternoon, he grabbed my arm and pulled me back from the window, whispering that there was someone out there. I looked where he was pointing, but I could not see anything except trees and shadows. He swore he saw movement, someone in dark clothing about 100 yards out, just standing there watching the cabin. I grabbed the binoculars and scanned the tree line for 10 minutes, but there was nothing there. No movement, no vehicles, no sign anyone had been anywhere near us. I suggested maybe it was a bear or a moose, something his eyes had misinterpreted, but he got angry, said I was not taking him seriously. That evening was tense. Marcus barely ate dinner, just kept checking the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked even though we had never locked the cabin before. Around 9, he finally told me he needed to show me something. He pulled out his phone, which should have been dead since there was no cell service or electricity at the cabin. But he had brought a portable charger. He showed me photos he had taken over the past month while guiding hunting trips. They were pictures of the same gray Dodge Ram pickup truck, taken at different locations all over northwestern Ontario, always in the background of his hunting camps or parked at trailheads where he was taking clients. He said the truck had been following him for 3 weeks, that whoever was driving it was always just far enough away to avoid direct confrontation, but close enough that Marcus knew they were there. I asked him if he had reported it to the police, and he laughed this bitter laugh, said he had tried, but they told him there was nothing they could do about a truck being in public places. He said the driver was always alone, a man in his 50s or 60s wearing a dark jacket and baseball cap, but Marcus had never gotten close enough to see his face clearly. He was convinced this person was watching him, tracking his movements, and that coming to the cabin had been a mistake because now this person knew about our family property. I did not know what to say. Part of me thought Marcus was having some kind of breakdown, maybe stress from work or something else going on in his life. But another part of me, the part that had grown up in the bush and learned to trust instincts, felt that cold finger of worry. Wednesday morning, October 17th, I woke up around 6:30 to find Marcus already gone. His sleeping bag was cold and his boots were missing from the front door. His truck keys were gone too. I figured he had gone for a drive to clear his head, maybe went into town to use a phone and call Sarah. But hours passed, and he did not come back. By noon, I was getting seriously concerned. I walked down to where we had hidden his truck, and it was gone. There were fresh tire tracks leading back toward the logging road, but that was it. No note, no message, nothing. I waited until 4 in the afternoon, then hiked the 2 kilometers out to the logging road where I could get cell service. I called Marcus's phone, probably 30 times, but it went straight to voicemail. I called his house in Thunder Bay, no answer. I finally called Sarah, who I had only met once, and she said she had not heard from Marcus since Sunday when he left for our trip. She sounded worried when I told her he had driven off without telling me where he was going. I hiked back to the cabin and spent that night alone, jumping at every sound, wondering if my brother was okay, or if something terrible had happened. Thursday morning, I drove Marcus's route back toward Thunder Bay, stopping at every gas station and rest stop along the way, asking if anyone had seen him or his truck. Nobody had. When I got to his house, his truck was parked in the driveway, but the front door was locked, and nobody answered when I pounded on it. I used the spare key he had given me years ago and went inside. Everything looked normal, almost too normal. His wallet was on the kitchen counter, his phone was plugged in, charging, and his work boots were by the door. But Marcus was not there. His bed had not been slept in. There was no sign of struggle, no indication anything was wrong except my brother was missing, and his truck had somehow gotten home without him. I called the Thunder Bay police that afternoon, filed a missing persons report. The officer who took my statement was polite, but clearly did not think this was urgent. He pointed out that Marcus was an adult, his vehicle was at his home, and there were no signs of foul play. He said sometimes people need space, that Marcus would probably turn up in a few days. When I told him about the paranoia, the truck that had been following him, the strange behavior at the cabin, the officer's expression changed to something like sympathy mixed with skepticism. He suggested Marcus might have been experiencing mental health issues, that I should check with local hospitals. I spent the next week searching. I contacted every hospital within 200 kilometers, every police detachment, every hunting lodge and gas station Marcus might have stopped at. I went back to the cabin 3 times, walking every trail, checking the old mine sites he had marked on the maps, looking for any sign of where he might have gone. I found nothing except animal tracks and the endless Ontario bush that swallows things whole. The RCMP took over the case after 2 weeks because Marcus had disappeared in an area under their jurisdiction. They conducted searches, brought in dogs, interviewed his friends and coworkers. Everyone said the same thing. Marcus had seemed normal, maybe a bit stressed from work, but nobody had any idea where he could have gone or why. In December, they found his truck abandoned at a rest stop about 40 kilometers northeast of the cabin, near Highway 11. It had been sitting there for almost 6 weeks before anyone reported it. The keys were still in the ignition, his wallet was in the glove box with all his credit cards and ID, and there was a sleeping bag in the back along with some camping gear. But no Marcus. The forensics team went through it and found nothing useful, no signs of struggle, no evidence of anyone else having been in the vehicle. The case went cold by February 2019. The RCMP told our family there was nothing more they could do without new evidence. Their theory was that Marcus had walked away from his life voluntarily, possibly suffering from some kind of mental health crisis, and that he would come back when he was ready. But I know my brother. He would never do that. He would never leave without a word, without some kind of explanation. Every October, since 2018, I take time off work and go back to that cabin. I walk the same trails, check the same places, look for any sign that might tell me what happened. Last year, I found something that made my blood run cold. About 3 kilometers from the cabin, at one of those old mine exploration sites Marcus had marked on his map, I found a campsite that had been used recently. There was a fire pit with old ashes, some flattened grass where a tent had been, and carved into a birch tree nearby were the initials MR and a date, October 16th, 2018, the day before Marcus disappeared. Someone had been there, either Marcus or someone pretending to be him, and I have no way of knowing which. I discovered what my downstairs neighbor had been doing for 3 years, and the Montreal police told me there was nothing they could charge him with because the laws have too many loopholes. I am 28 years old, finishing my doctorate in environmental science at McGill University, and I thought I had found the perfect apartment to complete my dissertation. It was a tiny one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone in Plateau Mont-Royal, one of those beautiful neighborhoods with tree-lined streets and cafes on every corner. The rent was affordable for Montreal, which should have been my first warning sign, and the landlord seemed eager to get someone in there quickly. I moved in during August 2019, right before the fall semester started, and for the first few months, everything seemed normal. The building was old, built sometime in the 1920s, with high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and those radiators that clanked and hissed all winter. There were 6 units total, and most of my neighbors were students or young professionals like me. I barely saw anyone except in passing in the hallway or at the mailboxes. My downstairs neighbor was a man named Owen Levesque, probably in his late 40s, who worked from home doing something with computers. I met him the second day after I moved in when he came upstairs to introduce himself and welcome me to the building. He seemed polite enough, a bit awkward maybe, with thick glasses and thinning hair, the kind of person who avoids eye contact and speaks quietly. He mentioned that the building had thin floors and asked me to be mindful of noise, especially late at night. I assured him I would be, that I was a quiet person who spent most of my time reading and writing. He smiled at that, said we would get along fine, and went back downstairs. That was the extent of our interaction for the first month. The first strange thing I noticed was the smell. Around October, maybe 6 weeks after I moved in, I started detecting this chemical odor coming through the heating vents, sharp and acrid, like burning plastic mixed with something medicinal. It would come and go, always at night, usually after 10. I assumed Owen was doing some kind of hobby work, maybe building models or something that involved glue or solvents. I mentioned it once in passing when I saw him collecting his mail, and he apologized, said he did some electronics repair as a side business and would make sure to ventilate better. The smell improved for a while, then came back stronger than before. By December, I started noticing Owen seemed to know my schedule better than I knew it myself. I worked at the university library most afternoons, usually returning home around 6, and I would often find him just arriving at the same time, or leaving his apartment right as I was unlocking my door. He always had a reason to start a conversation, asking about my research, mentioning things he had read about environmental science, offering recommendations for cafes or restaurants in the neighborhood. It felt friendly at first, maybe a bit much, but I chalked it up to him being lonely and working from home without much social interaction. But then he started mentioning specific details about my life that I had never told him. He knew I had a standing Tuesday meeting with my thesis advisor. He knew I ordered Thai food from the same restaurant every Friday night. He knew when my parents visited from Ottawa because he mentioned hoping they enjoyed their stay before I had even told anyone in the building they were coming. The laundry room incident started in January 2020. Our building had a shared laundry facility in the basement, coin-operated machines that worked half the time. I would put a load in, set a timer on my phone, and come back down to move things to the dryer. 3 separate times, I came back to find my clothes had been moved. And not just moved, but sorted. My underwear and bras would be separated from everything else, laid out neatly on the folding table. The first time, I thought maybe someone needed the washer and had been oddly considerate. The second time, I felt uncomfortable. The third time, I started doing laundry only during peak hours when other people were around. But even then, I would catch Owen down there, always with a small load of laundry, always seeming to time it when I was there. He never touched my clothes while I was present, but the way he watched me fold my things made my skin crawl. In March, right before COVID lockdown started, I received a friend request on Facebook from an account I did not recognize. The profile had no photo, minimal information, but we had 12 mutual friends, all people from McGill. I accepted without thinking much about it, then forgot about it. Over the next few months, as we all isolated in our apartments, I noticed this account would be the first to view my Instagram stories, would like my Facebook posts within minutes of me posting them, and occasionally comment with oddly personal observations. Once I posted about struggling to concentrate on writing, and this account commented that I should try working from the cafe on Saint Laurent Street near Villeneuve, the exact cafe I had been going to all semester but had never mentioned online. That was when I started checking this person's friend list and realized they had added several people from my program, had liked photos from places I frequented, and seemed to be building a profile based on my life. I blocked the account and thought that was the end of it, but then I started noticing someone had been in my apartment. I am meticulous about certain things, habits from growing up with anxiety. I always leave my bedroom door at exactly a 45-degree angle. I stack my research papers in a specific order. I arrange my shoes with the toes pointing toward the wall. These small things kept being different when I came home. My door would be fully closed or fully open. Papers would be in the wrong order. My shoes would be turned around. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, that isolation was making me paranoid, but then I started finding concrete evidence. A coffee mug I had washed and put in the cabinet would be in the sink, still slightly warm. My bathroom window, which I always kept locked, would be unlatched. My desk chair would be adjusted to a different height. In June 2020, I had a leak from my bathroom sink and had to call the landlord to send a plumber. The plumber was this older Portuguese man who had maintained the building for decades, and while he was fixing the sink, he had to access the pipes through a panel in the wall behind my toilet. When he removed the panel, he went completely silent, then told me in broken English that I needed to call police immediately. Inside the wall cavity, hidden behind the pipes, was a small wireless camera pointed directly at my bathroom, positioned to capture the shower, toilet, and sink area. The plumber said it was connected to the building's electrical system, had been there for a long time based on the dust around it, and whoever installed it knew exactly what they were doing. I called the Montreal police that same day, showed them the camera, explained the strange occurrences. 2 officers came out, a younger woman named Officer Dubois and an older man whose name I do not remember. They took the camera as evidence, checked the rest of my apartment, found 2 more cameras hidden in my bedroom, one in the smoke detector and one inside a heating vent. They were shocked at first, seemed ready to take this seriously, but then they explained the legal complications. Because the cameras were technically inside the building's walls and ventilation system, and because proving who installed them would be difficult without catching someone in the act, the Crown prosecutor might not have enough evidence for criminal charges. They said the best they could do was investigate and speak to the landlord and other tenants. The landlord claimed to know nothing about the cameras, said any tenant with basic electrical knowledge could have installed them. When police questioned Owen, he denied everything, said he barely knew me, that he had only spoken to me a handful of times. He suggested maybe the previous tenant had installed the cameras, that it had nothing to do with him. The police searched his apartment with his consent and found nothing, no equipment, no recordings, no evidence linking him to the cameras. Officer Dubois called me a week later to say they could not charge Owen with anything specific because they could not prove he had installed the cameras or accessed the footage. The best they could offer was to have a patrol car drive by occasionally and for me to document any further incidents. But Owen knew they had questioned him, and instead of lying low, he escalated. He started making noise at all hours, slamming doors, playing music, at 3 a.m, running water or moving furniture around just above the volume that would violate noise ordinances. When I filed complaints with the landlord, Owen would file counter-complaints, claiming I was harassing him, that I was mentally unstable, and making false accusations. He started following me when I left the building. Not close enough to violate any laws, but always there at the bus stop, in the grocery store, sitting in the park where I went to read. He never spoke to me or approached me directly, just made sure I saw him watching. I found photos of myself online in July 2020, dozens of them, posted on various forums and image boards. Some of them clearly taken through my windows from across the street, others taken while I was out in the neighborhood. They were captioned with my full name, my university program, speculation about my personal life. Some posts included my address. I reported everything to police, showed them the websites, and they said they would investigate. But tracking down who posted them would take time and resources they did not have. I hired a lawyer who helped me get a restraining order against Owen in August, but enforcing it was nearly impossible. He did not have to leave the building, just had to stay 50 meters away from me, outside the building, which he technically did while still managing to make his presence known. By September 2020, I could not take it anymore. I broke my lease, lost my security deposit, and moved back to Ottawa to finish my dissertation remotely. The financial cost was significant, setting me back thousands of dollars, but the psychological cost was worse. I had to change my name on all social media, create new email addresses, and delete years of online presence because the photos and posts kept appearing on new sites. I found out later from another tenant that Owen had done something similar to the woman who lived in my apartment before me, that she had also moved out suddenly after only 6 months. The landlord had known and rented to me anyway because keeping units filled was more important than tenant safety. I finished my doctorate last year and now work for Environment Canada in a position I love, but I cannot live alone anymore. I am in therapy dealing with anxiety that makes me check every room multiple times before sleeping. I still cover all cameras on my devices with tape and refuse to use smart home technology. And worst of all, last month, I saw Owen's Facebook profile in my suggested friends list, showing he had moved to Ottawa. I have no proof he followed me here, but now when I am out running errands or working at a cafe, I catch myself scanning faces in crowds, looking for those thick glasses and that blank expression, wondering if he ever really stopped watching. My sister Emma went missing on Highway 16 3 years ago, and I'm still searching because the RCMP gave up after 6 months, and our family refuses to accept that she is just another statistic on the Highway of Tears. I am 32 years old now, working as a paramedic in Prince George, British Columbia, and every single day off I have is spent driving that cursed stretch of road, talking to anyone who will listen, and trying to piece together what happened on October 9th, 2021. Emma was 26 when she disappeared, working as a veterinary technician in Smithers, a small town about 350 kilometers west of Prince George. She was beautiful, smart, careful, not the kind of person who took unnecessary risks. But she also grew up in northern BC, where distances between towns are massive and hitchhiking is sometimes the only option when you do not have a car and the bus service is unreliable. Emma had gone to visit her friend Sarah in Terrace for the Thanksgiving long weekend, taking the Greyhound bus out there on Friday, October 8th. The plan was for Sarah to drive her back to Smithers on Tuesday, October 12th, but Sarah's car broke down on Monday night, leaving Emma stranded. She called me that Monday evening around 7, asking if I could come get her, but I was working a 24-hour shift at the hospital and could not leave. She said she would figure something out, maybe catch a ride with someone heading east, that she had done it before and would be fine. That was the last time I spoke to my sister. Her voice was upbeat, unconcerned, making jokes about Sarah's terrible luck with vehicles. I told her to be careful, to text me when she got home, and she promised she would. I never got that text. According to the last confirmed sighting, Emma was seen at a gas station in Terrace on Tuesday morning around 9:30, October 12th. The security footage shows her buying coffee and snacks, looking at her phone, completely normal. The clerk remembered her because she asked about anyone heading towards Smithers or Prince George, and he directed her to a bulletin board where people posted ride shares. She left the gas station on foot, walking east along Highway 16 with her backpack, wearing jeans, hiking boots, and a blue rain jacket. 3 different witnesses reported seeing her at various points along the highway that morning between 10 and 11:30, walking on the shoulder with her thumb out. One driver, a woman named Patricia Chen, almost stopped to pick her up, but decided against it because she was only going as far as Kitwanga and did not want to leave Emma stranded again. The last confirmed sighting was at 11:45, about 30 kilometers east of Terrace, near the Exchamsix River. A logging truck driver named Robert McLeod passed her heading westbound and saw her getting into a vehicle heading east. He described it as a gray or silver pickup truck, possibly a Dodge or Chevy from the late 2000s crew cab style. He could not see the license plate or the driver clearly because he was going the opposite direction and only had a few seconds to notice. He said Emma seemed fine, was smiling and putting her backpack in the truck bed like she knew the person, or at least felt comfortable with them. That was the last time anyone saw my sister alive. When Emma did not show up for work on Wednesday or answer her phone, her boss called me. I immediately knew something was wrong because Emma was never late, never went silent. I called the Smithers RCMP that afternoon, filed a missing persons report, told them about her hitchhiking from Terrace. The officer who took my call was professional, but I could hear the weariness in his voice when I mentioned Highway 16. He said they would start an investigation, would check hospitals, and contact other detachments along the route. That first week was a blur of panic and desperate searching. Our parents drove up from Kamloops, and we spent days driving every kilometer of Highway 16 between Terrace and Smithers, stopping at every gas station, restaurant, rest stop, showing Emma's photo to anyone who would look. Most people were sympathetic but said they saw dozens of hitchhikers every week and could not remember any specific person. The RCMP did what they could with limited resources. They interviewed witnesses, collected the gas station footage, tracked Emma's phone, which had last pinged off a cell tower near the Exchamsix River around noon on October 12th before going dead. They put out alerts, contacted media, organized a search of the area where she was last seen. Volunteers from local indigenous communities, who knew the statistics better than anyone, came out in force to help search the ditches and forest along the highway. We found nothing that first month. No trace of Emma, no backpack, no clothing, nothing. It was like she had been erased. In November, a hiker found Emma's backpack about 80 kilometers east of where she was last seen, far past Smithers, near the Maurice River. It was partially hidden in the brush about 20 meters from the highway, down in a gully that you would only see if you were specifically looking. The backpack was intact, not damaged by weather or animals, but it had been opened and the contents were scattered around the area. Her wallet was there with her ID and bank cards, but no cash. Her phone was there too, completely dead. And when police checked it, the last activity was that cell tower ping at noon. Her spare clothes were scattered, some muddy, some torn. But there was no blood, no sign of struggle, no forensic evidence that investigators could use. They brought in dogs, searched the surrounding forest for 3 days, found nothing. It was like someone had dumped her belongings there deliberately, far from where she had been picked up, maybe to throw off the investigation. The RCMP told us the case was complex because Highway 16 crosses multiple jurisdictions, because there were no witnesses to any crime, and because without a body or evidence of foul play, they could not definitively say what had happened. Their working theory was that Emma had gotten into that gray pickup truck, something had happened, and whoever was driving had disposed of her belongings before continuing east. But with no description of the driver, no license plate, and hundreds of gray pickup trucks in northern BC, they had no leads to follow. The investigation continued through winter, but with no new evidence, resources were gradually pulled away. By April 2022, the case was essentially cold, still officially open, but not actively investigated. I could not accept it. I took a leave of absence from work and spent 3 months doing what the RCMP could not do with their limited budget and jurisdiction issues. I drove Highway 16 every single day, sometimes twice a day, at different times, documenting every vehicle I saw, every person hitchhiking, every potential witness. I talked to truck drivers at rest stops, showed them Emma's photo, asked about suspicious vehicles or people. I connected with families of other missing women from Highway 16, compared notes, looked for patterns. There were so many families like mine, indigenous families mostly, who had lost daughters, sisters, mothers to this highway over decades. We shared information, created databases, tried to do the work that should have been done by authorities with proper resources. In June 2022, I met a woman named Margaret, whose daughter had disappeared from Highway 16 in 2015. She told me about a pattern she had noticed, that several disappearances seemed to cluster around certain dates and locations, that there might be someone who traveled the highway regularly for work, someone who knew the area well enough to avoid detection. She had been compiling information for years, cross-referencing missing persons reports with employment records of truckers, loggers, anyone who had reason to be on that highway frequently. Her theory was that multiple disappearances might be connected, that there could be a predator who had been operating along Highway 16 for decades. The RCMP had dismissed her theories as conspiracy thinking, but when I looked at her evidence, the patterns were undeniable. In September 2022, almost a year after Emma disappeared, a mushroom picker found partial remains in a remote area about 15 kilometers south of Highway 16, accessible only by old logging roads. The remains were skeletal, scattered by animals, but forensic analysis confirmed they were human and female. DNA testing took months because the remains were so degraded, but in January 2023, we got the call that destroyed and relieved us at the same time. The remains were Emma's. The coroner could not determine cause of death because there was not enough left to analyze, could not say if it was homicide or accident, could not give us any answers, except that our sister was dead and had been for over a year. The discovery of Emma's remains should have reinvigorated the investigation, but it did not. The RCMP said without knowing cause of death, without any evidence connecting her remains to a specific suspect or crime, there was nothing to investigate. The location where she was found was so remote, accessed by multiple logging roads from different directions, that trying to determine how she got there was impossible. Their official conclusion was that Emma had gotten into that gray pickup truck, something tragic had happened, and without additional evidence, the case would remain unsolved. They filed it as a suspicious death with unknown circumstances and moved on. I did not move on. I could not. I spent the next year interviewing every person who had ever worked or lived near where Emma's remains were found. I talked to logging company employees, hunters, trappers, anyone who might have seen something unusual in October 2021. Most people were helpful but had nothing useful to offer. Then in March 2023, I talked to an old-timer named Frank, who had been hunting in that area for 40 years. He mentioned seeing a gray Dodge Ram pickup truck parked at one of the old logging road entrances in mid-October 2021. Remembered it because the driver had blocked the access and Frank had to wait 20 minutes for them to move. He described the driver as a white man, 50s or 60s, stocky build, wearing a work jacket. He had not thought anything of it at the time, figured it was another hunter or logger. I gave this information to RCMP, but they said it was too vague. Too much time had passed, impossible to track down without a license plate. I hired a private investigator with money our family had scraped together, and he spent 6 months trying to identify that truck and driver. He found 3 possible matches in the Prince George and Terrace area. Men with gray Dodge Rams who fit the description and had access to those logging roads through their work, but without evidence linking any of them to Emma. Without probable cause, police could not get warrants to search vehicles or property. The investigation hit another wall. Now 3 years later, I still drive Highway 16 every chance I get. I have a folder full of information, photos of suspicious vehicles, timelines, witness statements that police never followed up on. I have connected with 12 other families whose loved ones disappeared from this highway, and together we are building a case that law enforcement should have built decades ago. Emma's case is officially unsolved, filed away with dozens of others, but I refuse to let her become just another name on a memorial. Someone knows what happened to my sister. Someone is driving that gray pickup truck, maybe still picking up hitchhikers, maybe still hunting along Highway 16, and until I find them, I will keep searching. I rented a basement apartment in Toronto and discovered why the previous 5 tenants had left after only a few weeks. And now the landlord-tenant board says I need to give 60 days notice even though I am being terrorized in my own home. I am 29 years old, working as a graphic designer for a marketing firm downtown, and I thought finding an affordable place in Scarborough was a miracle considering Toronto's rental market. The apartment was advertised as a newly renovated basement unit in a semi-detached house, separate entrance, utilities included, and the rent was almost $800 below market rate for the area. I should have known something was wrong when the landlord, a man named Owen Kessler, offered me the place without even checking my references. He just needed first and last month rent in cash, and I could move in immediately. I was desperate after my previous roommate situation fell apart, so I ignored every red flag and signed the lease in September 2022. The house itself was older, probably built in the 70s, with aluminum siding that needed replacing, and a chain-link fence separating it from identical houses on both sides. Owen lived upstairs with what he said was his elderly mother, though I never saw or heard her in the 8 months I lived there. He was probably in his mid-50s, overweight with thinning hair and glasses, always wearing the same stained sweatpants and undershirt when he answered the door. He worked from home doing something with computers, and his van was always parked in the driveway blocking my car in, which should have been my first clue about his need to control everything around him. The basement apartment was actually nice when I first moved in. Freshly painted walls, new laminate flooring, a small kitchenette with updated appliances, and a bathroom with a stand-up shower. The bedroom was tiny but had a decent closet, and there was a small living area with a window that looked out at ground level into the backyard. Owen had installed a separate entrance through a side door with its own lock, and he made a point of telling me I had complete privacy and he would never enter without 24 hours written notice as required by law. The first week was fine, just the normal adjustment of living in a new place. I set up my workspace in the living area since I was doing hybrid work, 3 days at the office and 2 days from home. I unpacked my belongings, arranged my furniture, and started settling into a routine. Owen seemed respectful of boundaries, only contacting me once to make sure everything was working properly. But then I started noticing small things that did not add up. I am particular about how I organize my kitchen, always keeping my coffee mug on the left side of the dish rack and my plates stacked a specific way. One morning, about 10 days after moving in, my mug was on the right side and my plates were in a different order. I figured I had just been distracted and forgotten that moving stress was making me careless. Then my food started disappearing. Nothing major at first, just things like half a carton of eggs would be gone, or my bread would have fewer slices than I remembered. I thought maybe I was eating more than I realized and not keeping track properly. But then an entire container of leftover pasta vanished overnight, and I knew I had not eaten it. I sent Owen a polite text asking if he had needed to access my apartment for any maintenance, and he responded immediately saying no. He had not been downstairs since I moved in. He suggested maybe I had thrown the food away and forgotten, which seemed patronizing, but I let it go. The bathroom situation was worse. I have this specific way I arrange my toiletries, shampoo and conditioner on the left side of the shower, body wash on the right, toothbrush in the holder with the bristles facing the mirror. Multiple times I would come home from work to find everything moved around, my toothbrush facing the wrong direction, my soap on the wrong side. Once I found long gray hairs in my sink, definitely not mine since I have short brown hair. When I mentioned this to Owen, he said the previous tenant must have left them and they had just worked their way out of the drain, which made no sense, since the apartment had been deep cleaned before I moved in. The real turning point came in late October, when I was working from home on a Friday. I had a video call scheduled for 2 p.m, was sitting at my desk with my laptop open, when I heard footsteps above me. That was normal. Owen lived upstairs, but these footsteps were different. They were directly above me, matching my movements. When I got up to get water from the kitchen, the footsteps followed overhead. When I went to the bathroom, they stopped outside the bathroom door upstairs. When I returned to my desk, they returned to the position directly above me. I tried to shake off the creepy feeling, told myself it was coincidence, but it happened every single time I worked from home after that. Owen was tracking my movements from upstairs, following me room to room. That weekend, I decided to test something. I left my apartment Saturday morning, made a big show of getting in my car and driving away, but I actually parked around the corner and walked back quietly through the neighbor's yard. I positioned myself where I could see my side entrance door, but would not be visible from the house. Within 10 minutes, I saw Owen come out his front door, walk around to my side entrance, and unlock it with his own key. He went inside my apartment and stayed there for almost 20 minutes. When he came out, he looked around carefully before locking up and going back upstairs. I felt sick to my stomach, but I waited another hour before returning openly, wanting to see what he had done inside. When I inspected my apartment, everything looked normal at first. Then I checked my bedroom and found my dresser. Drawers had been opened and closed, my clothes slightly disturbed. My laptop, which I had left closed on my desk, was warm to the touch like it had been opened and used. When I checked the browser history, someone had accessed my email and social media accounts. The IP address was local, from inside the house. I immediately confronted Owen, knocking on his front door until he answered. He denied everything, said I was mistaken, that he had been home all day and had no reason to enter my apartment. He claimed I was being paranoid, that maybe I should see a doctor if I was having memory problems. His tone was condescending but also threatening, making it clear he would not admit to anything. I called the police that same day, explained what I had witnessed. 2 officers showed up, took my statement, but said they could not do anything without proof. Seeing Owen enter my apartment was not enough because, as the landlord, he was technically allowed to enter for emergencies, and he could claim that was what happened. The fact that my laptop was warm was not proof he had used it, and accessing shared Wi-Fi did not prove he had accessed my personal accounts. The officers suggested I change my locks, which I legally could not do without the landlord's permission, and install cameras, which felt like blaming me for his behavior. They gave me a case number and left, and I heard Owen laughing upstairs after they drove away. That is when things escalated. Owen started making noise at all hours, running water at 3 a.m, moving furniture at midnight, playing television loud enough to vibrate through the floor. When I filed a noise complaint with the city, he filed one against me, claiming I was the one disturbing him. He started leaving his garbage bins directly in front of my entrance, blocking my ability to get in and out easily. He would park his van so close to my car that I had to squeeze through sideways to get to my driver's side door. Every interaction became hostile. If I asked him to move something, he would say he would get to it eventually and then wait days. If I requested repairs, which were his legal obligation, he would either ignore me or show up at inappropriate times like 10 at night and claim those were the only hours he had available. In December, I discovered why 5 tenants before me had left. I ran into a woman at the grocery store who saw me carrying bags with my address visible and stopped me. Her name was Rachel, and she had rented my apartment for 3 weeks in June 2022. She told me Owen had done the same things to her, entering without permission, moving her belongings, following her movements from upstairs. She had found a camera hidden in the bathroom vent, which police had taken as evidence, but Owen claimed a previous tenant had installed it, and he knew nothing about it. The case had gone nowhere because they could not prove Owen had placed it there. Rachel said she knew of at least 4 other tenants who had similar experiences and had all broken their leases just to escape. I hired a camera inspection company in January 2023, professionals who sweep for hidden surveillance equipment. They found 3 cameras in my apartment, 1 in the smoke detector in my bedroom, 1 inside the heating vent in the bathroom, and 1 behind the mirror in my living area. All 3 were hardwired into the building's electrical system, installed professionally, and had been there for months based on the dust patterns around them. I called police again, showed them the equipment, and they arrested Owen that same day. He was charged with voyeurism and unlawful surveillance, but his lawyer got him released on bail within 12 hours because he had no prior convictions and was not considered a flight risk. That is where the legal system completely failed me. The landlord-tenant board said even with criminal charges pending, I still needed to give 60 days notice to break my lease. And if I left before that, Owen could sue me for rent. The police said Owen could not contact me directly because of bail conditions, but he could still live upstairs because it was his property. So I was stuck living in an apartment where my landlord had been watching me for months, and where I knew every movement was being tracked, where I felt violated every second I was there. I covered every possible camera location with tape, checked my apartment daily for new surveillance equipment, and barely slept because every sound from upstairs made me panic. I gave my 60 days notice in February, but Owen challenged it, claiming I needed to give more time because of some lease clause I had not noticed. The hearing was scheduled for late April, meaning I was trapped there for even longer. I stopped using my apartment except to sleep, spent every day at coffee shops or the office, and stayed with friends on weekends. Owen would text me about minor lease violations, like leaving shoes outside my door or my car being parked slightly over the property line, just to remind me he was watching. His trial for the surveillance charges was not scheduled until September, and his lawyer was already filing motions to have evidence excluded. I finally escaped in May 2023 when the landlord-tenant board ruled in my favor and allowed me to break my lease without penalty due to the criminal charges and documented harassment. I lost my last month rent that Owen had kept as deposit, and I had to pay for professional movers because I refused to spend extra time in that apartment packing slowly. I moved into a friend's spare room temporarily, eventually found a new place in a building with security and cameras in all common areas. The legal battle continued for months. Owen was eventually convicted of voyeurism in November 2023 and sentenced to 18 months probation with no jail time because the judge said his age and lack of criminal record warranted leniency. He was ordered to pay me $3,000 in damages, which I have never received because he claimed bankruptcy right after sentencing. I later discovered through a lawyer that Owen had been doing this for over a decade, that there was a pattern of young professional tenants moving in and leaving quickly. But nobody had ever pursued criminal charges until Rachel found that camera and I had the resources to hire investigators. The house was eventually sold in 2024, and I heard Owen moved to Hamilton, probably renting out another basement apartment to another unsuspecting tenant. I am in therapy now dealing with paranoia about being watched, cannot live anywhere without doing a full sweep for cameras, and have panic attacks in small spaces. The justice system gave him probation, but gave me a lifetime of anxiety and violation that no sentence could ever address. I bought my dream farmhouse in rural Saskatchewan in 2019 and found something in the well that explains why the property had been abandoned for 30 years. But the RCMP cold case unit says there is nothing they can do because the suspect died 20 years ago. I'm 37 years old now, working remotely as a software engineer for a company based in Vancouver, and I thought moving to the countryside near Yorkton would be the fresh start I needed after burning out in Winnipeg's tech scene. The property listing showed a 2-story farmhouse on 40 acres, original hardwood floors, wraparound porch, and a huge red barn that leaned slightly to one side but still had good bones. The price was absurdly low, almost 60% below market value for comparable properties, and the real estate agent kept emphasizing what a rare opportunity this was. I should have asked more questions about why it was such a bargain, but I was desperate to escape city life and convinced myself the low price was just because rural Saskatchewan was not a hot market. The house had been empty since 1987, according to property records, owned by the bank after the previous owners stopped making mortgage payments and apparently just disappeared. The agent said the family had probably moved to the United States for work, which was common in the 80s when farms were failing across the prairies. Everything about the place screamed neglect, peeling paint, overgrown yard, windows so dirty you could barely see through them. But the structure was solid. I closed on the property in May 2019 and immediately started planning renovations. My parents thought I was insane for buying a place that needed so much work, but I was excited about the project, about creating something beautiful in this forgotten corner of Saskatchewan. The first month was just cleaning and assessment. I hired a contractor from Yorkton, a guy named Dennis, who had been doing renovation work in the area for 20 years. He seemed enthusiastic at first, taking measurements, discussing plans for updating the kitchen and bathrooms, talking about restoring the original character while modernizing the systems. But about 2 weeks into the project, his attitude changed completely. He started showing up late, making excuses about other jobs, and finally told me he could not continue working on my property. When I pressed him for a reason, he got uncomfortable, said something about the house having bad history, and that he did not feel right taking my money for a project he could not finish. I thought he was being superstitious or had financial problems, so I hired a different contractor from Regina who did not know the area. The neighbors were even stranger. The closest property was about 2 kilometers down the road, an older couple named the Kowalskis who had farmed there for 50 years. I drove over to introduce myself the second week after moving in, bringing homemade cookies like my mother taught me. Mrs. Kowalski answered the door, took one look at me, and her face went pale. She asked which property I had bought, and when I told her the old Hoffman place, she made the sign of the cross and said she could not talk to me, that I should leave. Her husband came to the door, equally unfriendly, and told me they minded their own business, and I should do the same. They shut the door in my face, and I stood there holding cookies, feeling completely bewildered. I tried 2 other neighbors over the next few weeks with similar results. People either refused to talk to me or gave vague warnings about the property having a dark past. The well issue started in July when I was working on getting the water system functional. The house had been on well water, and I needed to make sure it was safe before I could live there full time. I hired a plumber from Yorkton, different guy than Dennis, who came out to inspect the well and water lines. The well was old, hand-dug probably in the early 1900s when the house was built, about 6 feet in diameter and lined with stones. The plumber said he would need to go down and check the pump and make sure the water was not contaminated. He set up his equipment, lowered himself down on a safety harness with a headlamp, and was down there for maybe 10 minutes before he started yelling for me to pull him up immediately. When he got to the surface, he was shaking, his face gray, and he told me I needed to call the police right away. He said there was something down there, something that was not supposed to be there, and he was not going back down under any circumstances. I thought maybe he had found a dead animal or something, but the way he was acting suggested it was much worse. I called the Yorkton RCMP detachment, explained the situation, and they sent 2 officers out that afternoon. They brought proper equipment, high-powered lights and cameras, and lowered them into the well first before sending anyone down. What they saw on the camera feed made them call for backup, for the forensics team, for the coroner. There were human remains at the bottom of my well, frozen and preserved in the cold water and mud, skeletal but with some tissue still intact. The forensics team spent 3 days excavating the well, carefully removing bones and clothing and anything that might be evidence. They found a complete skeleton, female based on the pelvic structure, with remnants of a floral dress and a gold wedding ring still on one finger. The depth of the well and the cold Saskatchewan winters had essentially preserved the remains better than if they had been buried in ground that froze and thawed. The RCMP forensic anthropologist estimated the remains had been there for at least 30 years based on decomposition and the clothing style. DNA testing took months because the remains were so old, but in November 2019, I got a call from Detective Morrison, who had been assigned to the case. He told me they had identified the remains as Catherine Hoffman, age 34, wife of Gerald Hoffman, who had owned my property until 1987. Catherine had been reported missing by her sister in May of that year, claiming Gerald had told family that Catherine had run off with another man, but the sister never believed it. The sister filed a missing persons report, but in 1987, with limited technology and a husband who seemed cooperative and passed a polygraph test, the case went nowhere. Gerald had continued living on the property alone for several months after Catherine disappeared, then stopped making mortgage payments and vanished himself. The bank foreclosed, and the property sat empty ever since. Detective Morrison explained that they were treating this as a suspicious death, likely homicide, but the challenges were enormous. Gerald Hoffman had died in 2003 in Alberta, liver failure from alcoholism, so he could not be questioned or charged. The physical evidence from the well was degraded, and determining cause of death was difficult because of the condition of the remains. The forensic pathologist found what might be trauma to the skull, consistent with blunt force, but could not say definitively that was the cause of death. Without Gerald alive to prosecute, without witnesses, without any evidence beyond the body in the well, the case was essentially unsolvable from a legal standpoint. But I needed to know what had happened in my house, on my property. I started researching, going through old newspaper archives, talking to anyone who would speak to me about the Hoffmans. I found a librarian in Yorkton named Helen, who remembered the case, remembered when Catherine went missing, and how Gerald had acted strange afterward. She said there had been rumors in town that Gerald was violent, that neighbors had heard arguing and sounds of fighting from the farmhouse, but nobody wanted to get involved in what they saw as a domestic issue. In the 1980s in rural Saskatchewan, people minded their own business, and abused women had few resources or protections. I found Catherine's sister, Margaret, living in Regina. She was in her 70s now, but remembered everything with painful clarity. She told me Catherine had called her 2 days before she disappeared, said she was going to leave Gerald, that she had finally had enough of his drinking and rages. Margaret had offered to come get her, but Catherine said she would handle it herself, that she was going to ask Gerald for a divorce. That was the last time Margaret spoke to her sister. When Gerald claimed Catherine had run off with some man from Saskatoon, Margaret knew it was a lie because Catherine would never have left without telling her, without taking her belongings, without saying goodbye. Margaret told me about going to the police in 1987, insisting they investigate Gerald, but they had interviewed him and found him convincing. He had cried, said he was heartbroken that Catherine left him, showed them a note supposedly from Catherine, saying she needed a fresh start. The handwriting was never analyzed, the note was never preserved as evidence, and the investigation went cold within weeks. Margaret had spent 32 years believing her sister was out there somewhere, alive, maybe with a new identity, and learning the truth destroyed her. She died 6 months after I found Catherine, and I went to her funeral, feeling responsible somehow, like disturbing that well had reopened wounds that should have stayed buried. The house itself started feeling oppressive after the discovery. I would hear sounds at night that I could not explain, footsteps on the stairs when I was alone, doors that would not stay closed, cold spots in rooms that should have been warm. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or supernatural things. I'm an engineer who deals with logic and code, but there was something wrong with that house. Every contractor I hired would find reasons to quit. The electrician said he felt watched while working. The carpenter said his tools would go missing and reappear in strange places. The painter refused to work alone, claimed he heard a woman crying in the upstairs bedroom. I tried to push through, spent a year living there while doing renovations myself, but it wore me down. I would lie awake at night thinking about Catherine, about what her last moments must have been like, about whether she knew Gerald was going to kill her. The well had been filled in and sealed by the RCMP after the excavation, but I could still see it from my bedroom window, a concrete cap marking the place where a woman had spent 30 years in cold, dark water, while her husband lied about her leaving. I started having nightmares, waking up feeling like I was drowning, feeling hands around my throat even though I was alone. By fall 2020, I could not take it anymore. I listed the property for sale, full disclosure about what had been found and the history, knowing it would be nearly impossible to sell. I was right. The house sat on the market for 18 months with not a single offer. I eventually sold it in 2022 to a developer who planned to tear everything down and build new structures, selling it for barely more than the land value. I lost almost everything I had invested in renovations and mortgage payments, but I did not care. I just needed to be free of that place. I moved back to Winnipeg, found an apartment in a modern building with lots of neighbors and noise, the exact opposite of that isolated farmhouse. I still have nightmares about the well, about finding Catherine down there, about wondering if Gerald had made her suffer before he killed her. The RCMP officially closed the case in 2021, listed as homicide with deceased suspect, no charges filed, no justice for Catherine beyond finally being found. Margaret's children held a proper funeral for their aunt in 2020, buried her in the family plot in Regina, finally gave her the rest she deserved. Sometimes I look up the property on satellite images, can see the old farmhouse is gone now, replaced with a modern, prefabricated home that some family from Ontario bought last year. They have no idea what happened there, and part of me feels guilty for not warning them. But what would I say? That the land is cursed? That a woman died there and nobody cared enough to investigate properly? That her husband lived in that house for months with her body in the well and nobody noticed anything wrong? The new owners seem happy based on their social media, posting photos of prairie sunsets and their kids playing in the yard. Maybe Catherine can rest now that the house where she suffered is gone. Maybe the land can heal, but I will never go back to rural Saskatchewan. Will never live anywhere isolated or old. Will never stop thinking about that well and what 30 years in the dark and cold must have been like. My neighbor Lily has been documenting my entire life for 2 years, and I only discovered it last month when someone created a dating profile using my photos and personal details I never shared with anyone. The Victoria Police say no crime has been committed, and they cannot issue a restraining order because she has not technically threatened me. So I am stuck living next to someone who knows everything about me, while the system does absolutely nothing. I am 35 years old, working as a software developer from home since the pandemic started, and I have weekend custody of my 6-year-old son after my divorce was finalized in 2020. I thought moving to this quiet neighborhood in Gordon Head would give us stability and a fresh start. Somewhere my son could ride his bike, and I could have a home office without the noise of apartment living. The house was perfect when I bought it in early 2021, a small 3-bedroom rancher with a fenced backyard and good schools nearby. Exactly what I needed to rebuild my life. Lily Patterson lived in the house directly next to mine, separated by maybe 20 feet and a low hedge that did nothing for privacy. She was probably in her late 40s, worked as an administrative assistant at the university, lived alone as far as I could tell, and seemed pleasant enough when I first moved in. She came over with a casserole the day I was unpacking, welcomed me to the neighborhood, asked about my work and family situation. I told her about the divorce, about having my son every other weekend, about working from home in tech. She seemed sympathetic, maybe a bit lonely, and I figured having a friendly neighbor would be nice after the isolation of the past year. The first few months were normal. Lily would wave when she saw me getting mail or mowing the lawn. Occasionally, we would chat about weather or neighborhood news, nothing unusual. But then I started noticing she was always outside when I came home from grocery shopping or taking my son to school. Always in her yard, coincidentally weeding or watering plants, always ready with a comment about my day. She knew when I had grocery delivery because she would mention seeing the truck. She knew when my ex-wife dropped off our son because she would ask how the custody exchange went. I thought maybe she just had a lot of time at her windows or was home as much as I was, so I did not think too much about it. By fall 2021, the questions got more specific. She asked how my project deadline went at work, but I had never told her I had a deadline. She mentioned hoping my son enjoyed his birthday party, but I had not told her it was his birthday. She commented on the pizza place I ordered from being good, knowing not just that I ordered pizza, but which specific restaurant I used. When I asked how she knew these things, she would laugh and say something vague about the neighborhood being small or seeing things in passing. But Gordon Head is not that small, and there was no way she could know these details from casual observation. I started paying more attention to her behavior. She was always home, which made sense if she worked from home sometimes, but she seemed to time her activities to coincide with mine. If I went for a run at 7 in the morning, she would be outside getting her newspaper. If I worked in my backyard office, she would be in her yard, close to the fence, finding reasons to be there. If I took my son to the park, I would see her car parked nearby, her sitting on a bench reading but always glancing our direction. It felt like surveillance, but was just subtle enough that I questioned if I was being paranoid. The turning point came in February 2023, when I decided to try online dating again. I created a profile on one of the major apps, used recent photos, wrote a bio that mentioned my work and hobbies, but nothing too personal. Within a week, I matched with a woman named Sarah who seemed interesting, worked as a teacher, had similar interests. We chatted for a few days, then agreed to meet for coffee. When I arrived at the cafe, Sarah was already there, but her expression was confused when she saw me. She asked if I was playing some kind of joke, showed me her phone, and there was another profile that had matched with her earlier that day. Same photos of me, but the bio was completely different, included details about my divorce, my son's name, my exact job title and company, even my home address. The profile claimed to be me, but was clearly created by someone else. I was horrified. Sarah thought I was running some scam or catfishing scheme and left immediately. I went home and started investigating, checking all social media and dating platforms for fake profiles using my information. I found 3 more on different sites, all using photos of me that I recognized from my actual profile, but also photos I had never posted online. Pictures of me at my house, at the park with my son, at the grocery store, candid shots taken without my knowledge. The profiles had been active for months. Some conversations with women who thought they were talking to me, all using information about my life that was accurate but that I had never shared publicly. I reported the profiles to the platforms and they took them down, but I needed to know who created them. I hired a digital forensics consultant, paid him $1,500 to trace the accounts. He found that all of them had been created from an IP address that belonged to Shaw Communications, traced to a residential address in Gordon Head, my address's immediate area. He could not narrow it down to a specific house without a warrant, but there were only 4 houses close enough to be on that network node. One of them was Lily's. I confronted her the next day, brought printouts of the fake profiles, asked her directly if she had created them. She looked genuinely surprised, said she had no idea what I was talking about, that I must be mistaken. She suggested maybe my ex-wife was harassing me or someone from work had a grudge. But her reaction felt off, too calm, almost like she had been preparing for this conversation. I told her I was going to the police and she just smiled, said I should do what I felt was necessary, that she had nothing to hide. The Victoria Police took my report, looked at the evidence I brought, but the officer explained the limitations. Creating a fake online profile using someone else's photos could be identity theft, but proving who created them without direct access to the device used was difficult. The IP address evidence was not specific enough for a warrant. The photos, while disturbing, had been taken in public places where I had no expectation of privacy. Without a direct threat or evidence of stalking that met legal definitions, there was not enough for criminal charges or even a restraining order. They said they would talk to Lily, do a wellness check, but that was all they could promise. 2 officers went to Lily's house the next day while I watched from my window. They were there for maybe 20 minutes, came out looking satisfied, stopped by my place to say they had spoken with her. She denied everything, seemed rational and cooperative, said she barely knew me beyond being neighbors. She suggested I was going through a difficult divorce and maybe experiencing paranoia or stress. The officers actually seemed to believe her, implied that I might be overreacting, that neighborhood disputes sometimes stem from misunderstandings. They gave me a case number and left. That is when things escalated. A week later, my ex-wife called me angry, said she had received a message on Facebook from someone claiming to be a concerned neighbor. The message included photos of me drinking beer in my backyard while my son was playing, implied I was an alcoholic and an unfit father, suggested she should reconsider custody arrangements. The photos were real, but taken out of context. A single beer on a Saturday afternoon made to look like something sinister. My ex knew it was garbage. We had our issues, but she knew I was a good father. But the fact that someone was trying to interfere with my custody arrangement was terrifying. Then Lily started showing up at my son's school. The first time, I thought it was coincidence. Maybe she had business at the university campus nearby. But it happened 3 times in 2 weeks. Her car in the parking lot during pickup, her walking past the playground during recess. The school had no reason to bar her since she had not done anything wrong, but I told the principal about the situation, asked them to be aware. They said they would keep an eye out but could not legally prevent someone from being in public areas near the school. Lily's behavior became more brazen after the police visit. She started leaving notes on my car, innocuous messages like, "Hope you have a great day," or "Your son is so adorable." But the subtext was clear. She wanted me to know she was watching. She began taking photos openly, standing in her yard with her phone pointed at my house, not even trying to hide it anymore. When I confronted her, she said she was documenting damage to her property that she believed I had caused, which was completely fabricated. She filed a complaint with the city saying my tree was encroaching on her property line, which led to an inspection that found nothing wrong, but wasted my time and money on a surveyor. She contacted my employer through LinkedIn, sent a message to my manager saying she was a concerned neighbor who had observed erratic behavior and wanted to make sure the company was aware. My manager called me confused, showed me the message, and I had to explain the entire situation, which was humiliating. Thankfully, my boss was supportive, but the fact that Lily was trying to damage my professional reputation made it clear this was not going to stop. I went back to the police in May 2023 with all the new evidence, the messages to my ex-wife, the school appearances, the notes, the employer contact. They agreed it was concerning, but still did not meet the threshold for a restraining order because Lily had not made explicit threats. The legal definition of stalking in British Columbia requires reasonable fear for safety, and the Crown needed evidence that I was in danger, not just uncomfortable. The detective I spoke with was sympathetic but honest, said until Lily did something clearly illegal or threatening, their hands were tied. He suggested I document everything, keep records, and consider civil remedies like a peace bond. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in harassment cases. He explained that getting a peace bond was possible, but required going through the courts, proving that I had reasonable grounds to fear for my safety, And even if granted, it would only prevent her from contacting me or coming within a certain distance. It would not stop her from watching from her own property or being in public places where I happen to be. The legal fees would be several $1,000s with no guarantee of success. I decided to pursue it anyway, filed the application in June, and waited for the court date. In the meantime, I tried everything to protect myself and my son. I installed security cameras covering all angles of my property, put up privacy fencing to block her view, changed all my passwords, locked down my social media, stopped posting anything online. I told my son's school that Lily was not authorized to pick him up under any circumstances, gave them her photo, explained the situation to my ex-wife so she could be vigilant during her parenting time. I felt like I was living in a prison of my own making, constantly looking over my shoulder, checking cameras, worrying about what Lily would do next. The court hearing for the peace bond was scheduled for September 2023. I presented all my evidence, testified about the pattern of behavior, explained how it had affected my life and my ability to feel safe in my own home. Lily represented herself, denied everything, claimed she was just a friendly neighbor who I had misinterpreted because of my mental health issues. She brought her own evidence, character references from other neighbors who said she was kind and normal, even brought up that she volunteered at a women's shelter, painting herself as a caring community member. The judge was not convinced there was enough evidence of imminent danger to grant the peace bond, said the situation was troubling but did not meet the legal threshold. The application was denied. After the hearing, Lily approached me in the courthouse parking lot, stood just outside what would have been the restricted distance if I had won. She told me she was glad the truth came out, that she felt vindicated, and that she hoped we could be good neighbors going forward. The look in her eyes was triumphant, like she had won some game I did not know we were playing. I moved out of that house last month, found a condo in a building with security and underground parking where she cannot follow me or know my comings and goings. Breaking the lease and moving cost me over $10,000, but I could not stay there anymore. My son asks why we had to move, why he cannot ride his bike in the neighborhood anymore, and I do not know how to explain that. Sometimes the law cannot protect you from someone who knows exactly how to operate just within the boundaries of what is legal. I still see Lily's car sometimes, parked outside my office building downtown or near my son's new school. I cannot prove it is her following me, and even if I could, I already know the police cannot do anything. So I live with it, always watching, always aware, always waiting for whatever she does next. I woke up in a Halifax hospital with no memory of 3 weeks, and the police will not tell me what happened during that time, treating me like a suspect instead of a victim while my life falls apart around me. I am 23 years old, was a fourth-year student at Dalhousie University studying marine biology, and I had a part-time job bartending at a waterfront pub called The Anchor to help pay tuition. My life was normal, busy with classes and work and friends, the typical university experience in a city I loved. Then I lost 3 weeks of my life and woke up in a world where nothing made sense anymore and nobody would give me straight answers about what had happened to me. The last thing I remember clearly is finishing my shift at The Anchor on October 12, 2022. It was a Tuesday night, relatively quiet for a weeknight, mostly regulars and a few tourists who had not left yet for the season. I clocked out around 11:30, said goodbye to the manager, and walked to my car in the employee parking area behind the building. That lot was dimly lit, just 2 streetlights for about 20 vehicles, situated between the pub and the waterfront boardwalk. I remember getting my keys out, remember the smell of salt water, and that damp October cold that gets into your bones in Halifax. Then nothing. My memory just stops like someone cut the film. The next thing I remember is waking up in the Queen Elizabeth II Health Sciences Center on October 31st, Halloween. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights and white walls, my body feeling wrong, heavy and painful in ways I could not immediately identify. A nurse noticed I was awake and called for a doctor, and over the next few hours, I learned that I had been brought in by ambulance 3 days earlier, found unconscious in Point Pleasant Park by a dog walker early in the morning of October 28th. I had been in and out of consciousness since then, mostly unresponsive, and they had no idea who I was until my fingerprints matched a campus security database from when I worked as a residence advisor my second year. The doctor told me I had sustained significant injuries, multiple contusions and bruising across my torso and legs, defensive wounds on my forearms, signs of restraint marks on my wrists and ankles where something had been tied tightly enough to damage tissue. I had lost almost 20 pounds, was severely dehydrated and malnourished, and had substances in my system they could not fully identify. My tox screen showed traces of sedatives, maybe ketamine or rohypnol, but also other compounds that did not match any standard drug database. They said my injuries were consistent with assault and prolonged captivity, that I had been held somewhere for an extended period, but I had no memory of any of it. The Halifax Regional Police sent 2 detectives to interview me once the doctors cleared it. Detective Morrison and Detective Chen, both in their 40s, experienced, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes from the start. They asked me what I remembered, and when I could only tell them about finishing work on October 12th and waking up in the hospital, their expressions said they thought I was lying or hiding something. They asked if I had been using drugs, if I had debt to anyone, if I had gotten involved in something illegal. Every question felt like an accusation, like they had already decided I was somehow responsible for whatever had happened to me. They told me my car had been found in the employee parking lot the morning after I disappeared, unlocked with my keys still in the ignition and my phone dead on the front seat. My wallet was in the glove compartment with my cards and ID, but no cash. The pub's security cameras showed me walking to my car at 11:32 on October 12th, showed me getting in and closing the door, then nothing for several minutes before the camera mysteriously went to static for approximately 4 minutes. When the feed came back, my car was still there, but I was gone. The detectives said the camera malfunction could have been deliberate, someone with technical knowledge disrupting the signal, or it could have been a coincidence, equipment failure. They said they had been looking for me for over 2 weeks, that my roommate had reported me missing when I did not come home that night and missed classes the next day. They had searched my apartment, interviewed my friends and co-workers, checked my bank accounts and phone records. Everything suggested I had simply vanished from that parking lot without any indication of where I went or what happened. My phone had last pinged a cell tower near the waterfront around 11:30, then went dead. My bank cards had not been used. There were no social media posts or communications after that night. I just disappeared. Now they wanted to know where I had been for those 16 days between disappearing and being found in Point Pleasant Park. I told them I did not know, that I had no memory of anything, and I could see them exchange that look that said they thought I was lying. Detective Morrison asked if I had been staying with someone, if maybe I had gotten into a relationship or situation I regretted and was covering it up. Detective Chen asked if I might have experienced a psychotic break, if there was any family history of mental illness. Every question felt like they were building a case against me rather than trying to help me. The investigation went nowhere because I could not give them anything useful. I tried everything to remember those missing weeks. I worked with a psychiatrist who specialized in trauma, tried hypnosis, kept a journal of any fragments or dreams that might be memories. Nothing came back, just a black void where 3 weeks of my life should have been. The psychiatrist said it was likely traumatic amnesia, my brain protecting me from whatever had happened, that the memories might never return or might come back in fragments. Over time, my life fell apart while I tried to put pieces together. I had missed too many classes and assignments to salvage the semester, had to withdraw and lose the term. My job at the Anchor said they understood but could not hold my position. My roommate was sympathetic but clearly uncomfortable around me, like I had brought something dark into our apartment, and he moved out at the end of our lease in December. My parents wanted me to come home to Cape Breton, said I needed to be with family, but I could not leave Halifax because the police investigation was technically ongoing, and they wanted me available for questions. I became obsessed with finding answers the police would not or could not provide. I went back to the waterfront every day, walked the parking lot, the boardwalk, every alley and side street trying to trigger some memory. I talked to homeless people who spent time in that area, showed them my photo from before, asked if they had seen me during those missing weeks. One man, a regular at the waterfront named Eddie, said he thought maybe he had seen someone who looked like me getting into a van near the casino around mid-October, but he could not be sure, could not describe the van beyond it being dark-colored and commercial-looking. I filed Freedom of Information requests to get copies of the police reports, spent hours reading through witness statements and investigation notes. That is when I found inconsistencies that terrified me. There had been 2 other cases in the previous year, young men around my age who had disappeared from the Halifax waterfront area for periods of 1 to 3 weeks, then turned up confused with memory loss and similar injuries. One had been found near the railway cut in the North End, the other on the Dartmouth waterfront. Both cases were still unsolved. Both men had reported amnesia, mysterious substances in their systems, and signs of restraint and captivity. The police had not connected the cases publicly, had not warned anyone there might be a pattern. I tracked down one of the other victims, a guy named Ryan, who had disappeared in February 2022 and been found 3 weeks later. He was a mess when I met him, living with his parents on disability because he could not work anymore, suffering from PTSD and paranoia. He told me the police had treated him the same way, like he was hiding something or complicit in his own disappearance. He had no memory of his missing time either, just fragments of nightmares that might be memories. Dark rooms, multiple voices, the smell of salt water and diesel fuel, the sound of machinery. He had tried to move on, but the not knowing was destroying him. Ryan said he had found security footage gaps around the time of his disappearance too. The cameras in the area where he was last seen had mysteriously malfunctioned. He thought someone was targeting men at the waterfront, someone with knowledge of camera locations and technical ability to disrupt them. He had shared this theory with police, but they dismissed it as speculation. He said there was a third victim he knew about, a guy named Chris who had refused to talk to anyone after it happened and had moved to Ontario to escape. I brought this information back to Detective Morrison, showed him the patterns, begged him to take it seriously. He admitted they were aware of the other cases, that there might be a connection, but without witnesses or forensic evidence, they had nothing to investigate. The waterfront area had dozens of commercial properties, boats coming and going, transient populations, and thousands of places someone could hold a person without being noticed. They had interviewed staff at marinas, warehouses, shipping companies, but nobody had seen or heard anything suspicious. The detective told me something off the record that made everything worse. My clothing, which had been taken as evidence when I was found, had traces of industrial cleaning chemicals, salt water, and fibers that suggested I had been held somewhere near marine industry, possibly a boat or warehouse. But the fibers were generic, could have come from hundreds of locations around Halifax Harbor. My injuries suggested I had been restrained with zip ties and possibly moved multiple times to different locations. The substances in my system were sophisticated, the kind of things someone with medical or chemistry knowledge would have access to. But all of this was circumstantial, nothing that pointed to a specific suspect or location. Months passed, and the case went cold officially, though Morrison said he was keeping it open and would follow up on any new leads. I tried to rebuild my life, enrolled in classes for the winter semester, found a new roommate, got a different job at a coffee shop far from the waterfront. But I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever had taken me was still out there. I started having panic attacks in enclosed spaces, could not sleep without lights on, checked my apartment constantly for signs of entry. My relationships fell apart because I could not trust anyone, could not explain my paranoia without sounding insane. In April 2023, I was walking home from class and saw a van parked across from my building, dark blue, commercial style with no company markings. A man was sitting in the driver's seat watching my building. When he saw me notice him, he drove away quickly. I got the license plate and reported it to Morrison, but the plate came back as stolen from a vehicle in Dartmouth. The detective said there was nothing they could do, that it might not even be connected, but I knew. Whoever had taken me was still watching, maybe planning to take me again. I moved back to Cape Breton in June 2023. Could not stay in Halifax anymore. I finished my degree online, graduated in 2024, but have not been able to work in my field because I cannot handle being near water or harbors anymore. The smell of salt water triggers panic attacks. The sound of boat engines makes me sick. I'm in therapy, but the therapist says without recovering the memories, healing is nearly impossible. My body knows what happened, even if my mind has blocked it out. Sometimes I have nightmares that might be fragments of memory. A room with cement walls and no windows. Multiple people, their faces always blurred. The sensation of cold metal, of restraints cutting into skin. Voices discussing me like I was an object or experiment. The smell of diesel and chemicals. But I cannot tell if these are real memories or just my brain trying to fill the void with horror movie imagery. The not knowing is worse than any concrete memory could be because my imagination fills those 3 weeks with every possible nightmare. The Halifax police officially closed my case in January 2024, listed it as assault with unknown perpetrator, unsolved. Detective Morrison retired last year, and the new detective assigned to these cases has no interest in pursuing old leads. Ryan killed himself in August 2024, left a note saying he could not live with the not knowing anymore. I think about that option sometimes, about how much easier it would be to not exist than to live with this void in my life. But I am still here, still searching for answers nobody else seems to want to find, still carrying 3 weeks of missing time that weighs more than any memory could. I inherited my grandmother's heritage home in Quebec City and discovered the caretaker had been living in the walls for 6 months, watching me through peepholes while I slept. And the justice system let him walk free with probation because he is elderly and claimed he thought the house was rightfully his. I am 31 years old, working as an architect for a firm in Montreal. And when my grandmother passed away in March 2022, she left me her Victorian home in the Old Quebec district, a beautiful 3-story property built in 1887 that had been in our family for generations. The house was worth over $1 million because of its location and historical designation, and my plan was to renovate it carefully while respecting the heritage requirements, then either live there or sell it depending on how much the renovation would cost. My grandmother had employed a caretaker for the past 15 years, a man named Benjamin Rousseau, who was in his early 70s, a retired carpenter who had done maintenance and repairs on the property. He had lived in a small apartment above the detached garage behind the main house, part of his compensation for keeping the property maintained. When I met Benjamin the week after the funeral, he seemed like a kind old man, spoke softly in French-accented English, expressed condolences about my grandmother, and said he would continue to care for the house as long as I needed him. I told him I appreciated his help and that he could stay in the garage apartment until I decided what to do with the property. I was not planning to move to Quebec City immediately, had my job and apartment in Montreal, so I visited the house every few weeks to sort through my grandmother's belongings and meet with contractors about renovation plans. Benjamin was always there when I visited, eager to show me things that needed repair, offering advice about maintaining the old systems, telling stories about my grandmother and the house's history. He seemed harmless, maybe a bit too attached to the property, but I figured that was natural after 15 years of taking care of it. He would mention occasionally that he had put his heart into the house, that he knew every board and pipe better than anyone, that my grandmother had promised him he could stay there as long as he wanted. I assured him I had no intention of kicking him out, that he could remain in the garage apartment indefinitely. By June, I had decided to take a year's sabbatical from my firm to personally oversee the renovation, moving into the house full-time to save on hotel costs and be present for contractors. I gave Benjamin 2 months' notice that I would be occupying the main house starting in August, that I would need privacy, but he could continue living in the garage apartment. He seemed upset by this, said he had always had access to the main house, that my grandmother let him come and go as needed for maintenance. I explained that things would be different now, that I would handle coordinating with contractors, and he should focus on the exterior grounds work. His expression when I said this was strange, a flash of anger quickly covered by that gentle old man smile. But I dismissed it as him being territorial about a place he had cared for so long. I moved in on August 1st with my belongings and my cat, a gray tabby named Colette. The house was enormous, over 4,000 square feet across 3 floors, plus a full basement and attic, with original woodwork, stained glass windows, and those beautiful but creaky floors that announced every footstep. I set up my bedroom on the 2nd floor, in what had been my grandmother's room, used another 2nd floor room as my office, and planned to renovate the 3rd floor last since I would not need that space immediately. The basement was unfinished, just stone walls and a dirt floor, used for storage and the old furnace. The attic was full of generations of family belongings I would need to sort through eventually. The first week was normal, just me settling in, getting used to the sounds of an old house, meeting with the contractor to finalize renovation plans. Benjamin would wave from the garden when he saw me, occasionally knock to ask if I needed anything, but generally kept his distance. Then I started noticing small things that felt off. I would leave my coffee mug on the kitchen counter and find it in the sink later, washed and put away. I would close doors, and they would be open when I returned to a room. My mail would be sorted and stacked neatly on the hall table, even though I had not brought it in yet. At first, I thought maybe I was being forgetful, that the stress of the move and renovation planning was making me absent-minded. But then Colette started acting strange. She would stare at the walls, particularly in the hallway on the 2nd floor, and hiss at nothing I could see. She refused to go near certain areas of the house, especially the basement door and a section of wall in my bedroom. Cats are sensitive to things humans miss, so I started paying more attention to the house. That is when I began hearing sounds at night. Not the normal creaks and groans of an old house settling, but deliberate sounds. Footsteps in the walls, soft and careful, moving from room to room. Scratching sounds coming from behind the wainscoting in the hallway. Once I heard what sounded like breathing on the other side of my bedroom wall, slow and steady, like someone standing there listening. I convinced myself it was rats or squirrels in the walls, called Benjamin to ask about pest control. He assured me there were no animals in the house, that he checked regularly, that old houses just made odd sounds and I would get used to it. But the sounds continued and got more frequent. I would hear movement in the walls during the day while I was working, would feel like I was being watched even when I was alone. I started checking the windows and doors obsessively, making sure everything was locked. But the strange occurrences continued. Items would be moved, my bathroom products rearranged, even my clothing in the closet seemed disturbed, like someone had been going through it. In late September, I hired a contractor to start work on the kitchen renovation. The contractor, a man named Mark, who specialized in heritage properties, arrived early one morning to begin demolition. He was removing old cabinets when he found something that made him immediately call me over. Behind the cabinets, hidden in the wall cavity, was a modified space. Someone had carefully removed sections of the original plaster and lath to create a passageway about 2 feet wide, running vertically through the wall. Mark shone his flashlight up and could see it continued to the 2nd floor. When he looked down, it went to the basement. Someone had created a hidden network through the walls. We called the police immediately. The Service de Police de la Ville de Quebec sent officers who brought contractors with proper equipment to open walls safely. What they discovered was horrifying. Benjamin had modified the historic house over years, creating a network of passageways through the walls that connected almost every room. He had removed bricks from the chimney structures, cut through support beams carefully so they would not show damage, created a maze that let him move through the entire house unseen. In my bedroom, they found a peephole drilled through the plaster at eye level, positioned so someone in the wall could watch the bed. In the bathroom, there was another hole near the shower. Throughout the house, they found nearly a dozen viewing positions. In the main passageway behind my bedroom wall, police found evidence Benjamin had been living there: a sleeping bag, food wrappers, water bottles, a camping lantern, even some of my belongings he had taken over the months. Photographs of me sleeping, dozens of them, printed and pinned to the wall inside the hidden space. A journal where he had documented my routines, what time I woke up, what I ate, when I showered, everything about my daily life written in obsessive detail. The journal also contained writings about how the house was his, how my grandmother had promised it to him, how I had stolen his rightful inheritance, and he was just taking back what belonged to him. They found the access points he used to enter and exit the walls. One in the basement hidden behind shelving units, another in the attic behind old furniture, and a third in the garage apartment that connected directly to the main house through a modified foundation gap. Benjamin had spent years creating this system, probably started when my grandmother was still alive, but too frail to notice, perfecting it so he could move through the house like a ghost. The modifications were done expertly by someone who knew carpentry and old house construction intimately, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Police arrested Benjamin that afternoon at the garage apartment. He did not resist, actually seemed proud of his work, told officers that he had built that house into what it was, that 15 years of labor gave him more right to it than some granddaughter who only showed up after the old woman died. He claimed my grandmother had verbally promised him the house, that there was an understanding between them, and he was just protecting his investment until the courts could sort out the inheritance dispute. Of course, there was no will or document supporting this, just the delusions of a man who had developed an obsessive attachment to a property that was never his. The charges seemed serious at first: breaking and entering, voyeurism, criminal harassment, mischief to property. The Crown prosecutor said they would seek significant jail time given the premeditation and violation of privacy, but Benjamin hired a good lawyer who built a defense around his age and mental state. They argued he had worked for my grandmother for 15 years, had developed cognitive issues that made him genuinely believe the house was partially his, that he was not a violent predator, but a confused elderly man who had made poor choices. They brought in a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with delusional disorder, said he genuinely believed his own narrative about my grandmother's promises. The trial was in April 2023. I testified about the terror of discovering someone had been watching me, about the violation of finding those photographs and journals. But Benjamin's lawyer made it about his age and confusion, painted him as a victim of exploitation who had worked for 15 years with the expectation of compensation that never came. The judge seemed sympathetic to the defense, noted that Benjamin had no prior criminal record, that he was now 73 years old and in declining health. The voyeurism charges were reduced because the defense argued he was living in the walls primarily for shelter, that the peepholes were just poor judgment rather than sexual predation since the photos showed me clothed and sleeping. Benjamin was convicted of criminal harassment and mischief to property in June 2023, sentenced to 18 months, probation, with conditions that he stay away from me and the property. No jail time because the judge said incarceration would be unduly harsh for someone his age with health issues. He was ordered to pay me restitution of $40,000 for the damage to the heritage structure and emotional distress, but his lawyer immediately filed paperwork showing he had no assets and declaring bankruptcy. I have not received a dollar. The damage to the house was catastrophic from a heritage perspective. The modifications Benjamin made had compromised structural elements, cut through original materials that could never be properly restored. The Heritage Board had to get involved. My renovation plans were delayed by a year while engineers assessed the damage and planned repairs. The cost ballooned to over $300,000 just to restore what he had destroyed, and the house would never be truly original again. I had to disclose the history when I eventually sold it in 2024. Took a loss of almost $200,000 below market value because buyers were disturbed by what had happened there. I cannot live in old houses anymore. Moved to a modern condo in Montreal with concrete walls and security cameras everywhere. I am in therapy for trauma and hypervigilance. Cannot sleep without checking every space multiple times. Have panic attacks in buildings with crawl spaces or attics. The worst part is knowing Benjamin is out there. Finished his probation in December 2024. Free to go wherever he wants. I heard through the real estate agent that he moved to somewhere in the eastern townships, possibly working as a handyman again. The system treated him with compassion he never showed me. Gave him the benefit of doubt while I lost my inheritance, my sense of safety, and nearly 2 years of my life dealing with the aftermath of his obsession. Some nights, I still wake up feeling like someone is watching me, like there are eyes behind the walls, and no amount of therapy has made that feeling go away completely. I spent the winter of 2022 at a remote cabin in northern Manitoba documenting wildlife for a photography project, and something was watching me from the tree line every single night for 4 months. The RCMP says there is no evidence of criminal activity, and Parks Canada claims no unusual incidents were reported in that area. But I have footage that proves something was out there, and nobody will explain what I captured on those trail cameras. I am 29 years old, a wildlife photographer who has spent years working in remote locations across Canada, from the Arctic tundra to Pacific coastal forests. I am not someone who scares easily or imagines things in the wilderness. I know the sounds animals make, I understand predator behavior, and I can tell the difference between natural phenomena and something that should not be there. What happened during those 4 months in Manitoba was not natural, and the fact that authorities refused to investigate properly terrifies me more than what I experienced. The project was supposed to be my masterpiece, a photographic documentation of boreal forest wildlife through a full winter cycle. I had secured funding from a conservation organization and permits from Parks Canada to stay at an old fire watch cabin about 150 kilometers northeast of Thompson, accessible only by float plane in summer or snow machine in winter. The cabin was basic, one room with a wood stove, propane lights, and a hand pump for water from a nearby stream. No electricity, no phone service, no neighbors within 50 kilometers. Perfect isolation for observing wildlife without human interference. I flew in on November 1st, 2022, with 4 months of supplies, camera equipment, and satellite phone for emergencies. The first 2 weeks were exactly what I expected. Incredible wildlife activity. Lynx hunting snowshoe hares, wolves traveling through, a wolverine that visited my bait stations regularly. I set up 12 trail cameras in a grid pattern around the cabin, covering all approaches from different directions, programmed to capture both photos and video when motion sensors triggered. The footage was amazing, documenting behaviors and species interactions that were scientifically valuable. I would download the camera data every few days, back everything up to multiple drives, and felt like the project was exceeding expectations. The lights started appearing around November 20th. I first noticed them while reviewing trail camera footage from the northern cameras, about 100 meters into the tree line. They were not flashlights or headlamps. The light was different, more diffuse and oddly colored, somewhere between white and pale blue. They would appear for a few seconds, move horizontally through the trees, then disappear. Initially, I thought maybe it was reflection from ice crystals or some atmospheric phenomenon I was not familiar with. But the lights appeared in footage from multiple cameras over several nights, always between midnight and 4 in the morning. By early December, the lights were appearing every night and always in the same pattern. They would start at the eastern edge of my camera grid, move slowly through the tree line in a rough circle around the cabin, always staying about 80 to 100 meters out, never getting closer but never moving farther away either. The movement was too deliberate to be natural, too consistent in height and speed to be animals with reflective eyes. When I reviewed footage in sequence from different cameras, I could track the lights moving from one camera's field of view to the next, completing a full circle around my cabin over about 2 hours. I started staying awake to observe directly, watching from the cabin windows with night vision binoculars I had brought for wildlife observation. What I saw matched the camera footage but was even more disturbing in person. The lights moved through the forest with no sound, no breaking branches, no crunch of snow that you would hear from anything physical moving through the bush. They maintained the same height, roughly 6 feet off the ground, moving smoothly between trees as if the terrain meant nothing. When I tried to illuminate them with my spotlight, they would disappear instantly, only to reappear minutes later in a different position along the perimeter. On December 15th, something changed. The lights were not the only thing being captured on cameras anymore. The motion sensors were triggering constantly, sometimes 20 times a night, but when I reviewed the footage, there was nothing visible in many clips. Just the camera activating, recording empty forest for the programmed 30 seconds, then shutting off. But in some clips, there was something at the very edge of the frame, partially obscured by trees. A shape that was roughly human height and proportions, but blurred somehow, like the camera could not focus on it properly, even though everything else in the frame was sharp. The shape would appear for a few seconds, never moving toward the cabin, but always oriented toward it, like it was watching. I started documenting everything meticulously. I kept detailed logs of when the lights appeared, which cameras caught what, timestamps for everything. I made sure to back up all footage to multiple drives, knowing this was evidence of something significant, even if I could not explain what. The isolation started getting to me. Normally, I love being alone in the wilderness, find it peaceful and meditative. But knowing something was circling my cabin every night, watching me, changed everything. The cabin felt like a trap instead of a sanctuary. By January, the pattern escalated. The motion sensors were triggering during the day now, capturing that same blurred shape moving through the tree line during daylight hours. Animals in the area were behaving strangely too. The wolves stopped howling. The ravens that normally visited for scraps disappeared completely, and even the small mammals seemed to avoid the area within 200 meters of the cabin. The forest was too quiet, that unnatural silence that happens when something is wrong, when prey species go into hiding because a predator is near. On January 28th, there was an incident that convinced me I needed to leave. I had gone outside during daylight to check one of the closer trail cameras, about 50 meters from the cabin. It was minus 30 degrees, clear sky, that kind of cold where your breath freezes instantly and every sound is magnified. I was downloading the camera's memory card when I heard footsteps in the snow behind me. Not animal footsteps, but the deliberate crunch, crunch, crunch of boots walking through snow crust. I turned around and there was nothing there. No tracks in the snow except my own trail from the cabin. But the footsteps continued circling around me and I could see the snow depressing slightly, like something was stepping on it. but there was nothing visible creating the impressions. I ran back to the cabin, locked myself inside, and spent the next hour watching through the windows as those footstep depressions continued around the clearing, always staying about 30 meters from the building. When I checked the trail cameras later, the ones pointing at the clearing showed nothing. No visible figure, no explanation for the footsteps, just empty forest, and my panicked run back to shelter. That was when I realized, whatever this was, it could affect the physical world in ways that cameras could not always capture. I used my satellite phone to call the RCMP detachment in Thompson that evening. The connection was poor, but I explained the situation, said I was being surveilled by someone or something at my remote cabin, that I had evidence on trail cameras, that I needed assistance. The dispatcher sounded skeptical, said they would send someone when weather permitted, but that it might be several days given my location and current winter conditions. She asked if I was in immediate danger, if I had been threatened directly, and when I could not give her a concrete threat beyond feeling watched and hearing unexplained sounds, I could tell she was categorizing this as low priority. 4 days later, on February 1st, an RCMP officer named Constable Davies flew in by helicopter, brought by Parks Canada staff doing routine winter patrols. He spent about 3 hours at the cabin, reviewed some of my footage, walked the perimeter checking for evidence of human presence. He was professional, but clearly thought I was experiencing cabin fever or psychological stress from isolation. He pointed out that the trail camera footage could be explained by equipment malfunction or atmospheric phenomena, that the blurred shapes could be frost on the lens or digital artifacts. The footsteps I described were likely my own memory getting confused by cold exposure and stress. He checked the area around the cabin for tracks or physical evidence and found nothing except animal tracks that were weeks old. He said if someone was surveilling me, they would leave evidence. There would be tracks, camps, some sign of human activity. The absence of evidence meant there was no threat. He suggested I consider ending my project early if the isolation was becoming too much, that 4 months alone in the bush could do strange things to perception. He filed a report saying no evidence of criminal activity or threat was found, gave me an emergency number to call if situation changed, then flew out. After he left, the activity intensified immediately, like whatever was out there knew I had tried to get help and was responding to it. That night, the lights were brighter and came closer, within 40 meters of the cabin. The motion sensors triggered continuously, every camera capturing that blurred shape moving through the forest, sometimes multiple shapes in different locations simultaneously. Something began scratching at the cabin walls, methodical and persistent, working its way around the entire structure. I sat inside with my back against the wood stove, hunting rifle across my lap, listening to those sounds, and knowing that shooting at something I could not see would solve nothing. The worst incident happened on February 10th during a severe blizzard. The wind was howling, visibility was zero, and I was trapped inside keeping the fire going and hoping the cabin would withstand the storm. Around 2 a.m., I heard someone or something trying to open my door, the handle turning, pressure against the wood like something was pushing. I had the door barricaded with my storage trunk, but I could see the door flexing inward with each push. I yelled that I was armed and would shoot, but the pushing continued for almost an hour. When it finally stopped, I checked the trail cameras the next morning, and they'd all been disabled. Not broken or stolen, but turned to face the ground, or covered with snow in ways that could not have happened naturally during the storm. That was when I activated my emergency beacon. I could not stay there anymore. Parks Canada and RCMP flew in the next day, evacuated me by helicopter. I left everything except my camera equipment and the backed up footage. They said they would retrieve my remaining supplies later, but when they went back 2 weeks later, the cabin had been vandalized. Not by animals, but deliberately. Equipment destroyed, food supplies contaminated, furniture broken. My trail cameras were found scattered in the forest up to a kilometer away from where I had installed them. Nobody could explain how that happened during a period when the nearest human was 50 kilometers away. I have spent the past 2 years trying to get someone to investigate properly. Parks Canada says they found no evidence of unauthorized human activity in that area. The RCMP maintains their position that no crime occurred. I have shown the footage to wildlife biologists, atmospheric scientists, and even paranormal investigators. Everyone has theories, but nobody has answers that satisfy scientific scrutiny. The conservation organization that funded my project buried my findings, said the footage was inconclusive, and publishing it would damage their credibility. I cannot work in remote locations anymore. The isolation that used to bring me peace now triggers panic attacks. I stay in cities now, taking jobs, shooting weddings and corporate events, work I find meaningless but safe. I still have all the footage backed up, hours of evidence that something was watching me, circling my cabin, interacting with the physical world in ways that cameras could barely capture. I have shown it to journalists, researchers, anyone who will look, but nobody wants to publicize something that cannot be explained. The scientific community prefers mysteries that have potential solutions, not evidence of phenomena that defy everything we understand about how the world works. Sometimes I search online for reports from that area of Manitoba, looking for other people who might have experienced something similar. I found references to indigenous stories about that region, warnings from Cree elders about places where the boundary between worlds is thin, where spirits or entities move through the forest, watching and waiting. The conservation organization never mentioned that history when they assigned me to that location, never warned me that I might be entering territory that has been avoided for generations for reasons our modern science refuses to acknowledge. I moved to a small town on Vancouver Island in 2021 and discovered my rental house was a former crime scene that nobody told me about. And now the RCMP Cold Case Unit has reopened an investigation because of evidence I found sealed in the walls during renovations that police missed 20 years ago. I am 33 years old, working remotely as a data analyst for a tech company based in Seattle, and I thought relocating to Nanaimo would be the lifestyle change I needed after years of grinding away in Vancouver's expensive and stressful urban environment. The rental house was advertised as a charming renovated cottage on the outskirts of town. 2 bedrooms with a big yard and mountain views, at a price that seemed almost too good. But the landlord said he was offering a deal because he wanted a long-term tenant who would take care of the property. I signed a 1-year lease in October 2021 and moved in with my dog, a golden retriever named Scout, excited about small-town life and remote work flexibility. The first indication something was off came from the neighbors, or rather the lack of interaction with neighbors. The houses on my street were spaced far apart, typical of semi-rural Vancouver Island properties, but even accounting for that distance, people seemed to actively avoid my place. Nobody waved when I walked Scout. Nobody stopped to introduce themselves. And when I tried initiating conversation at the local grocery store by mentioning where I lived, faces would change, and people would find excuses to end the interaction quickly. I thought maybe small towns were just cliquish, and it would take time to be accepted as an outsider. Then there was the mail carrier. For the first month, mail was delivered normally, left in the mailbox by the road. But suddenly in November, I noticed the carrier would stop her vehicle, get out, walk quickly to the mailbox, drop the mail without looking toward the house, and leave immediately. I finally caught her one day and asked if everything was okay, if I had done something wrong. She looked uncomfortable, said everything was fine, but I could see she was nervous standing there at the edge of my property. When I pressed, she said she did not like the house, that it had bad energy, and left before I could ask what she meant by that. The weirdness escalated when I decided to do some minor renovations in December, just cosmetic updates to make the place feel more like mine. I wanted to install floating shelves in the living room, and when I started drilling pilot holes into the drywall, the bit went through much easier than expected. The wall was hollow behind the drywall, more space than there should have been for a standard wood frame construction. Curious, I opened up a small inspection hole and discovered the wall cavity was much larger than normal, and there was something in there. Not insulation, but items wrapped in plastic sheeting and sealed with duct tape. I pulled out the first package, carefully, already feeling like I was crossing into something I should not be touching. Inside the plastic was a spiral-bound notebook, the kind teenagers use for school, with water damage and discoloration but still readable. The pages were filled with handwriting, a teenage girl's diary entries dated from 2002 and 2003. The name inside the front cover said, Miranda Hoffman, if found, please return. As I read through the entries, my skin started crawling. This was not just a lost diary. It was evidence of a life, filled with normal teenage concerns and then increasingly disturbing entries about being scared, about someone in the house making her uncomfortable, about feeling watched. I stopped reading and called the landlord immediately, a man named Greg Morrison, who lived in Victoria and managed several rental properties on the island. I told him what I found and asked if he knew anything about Miranda Hoffman. There was a long silence on the phone. Then he said, I should not worry about it, that the previous owners probably left some things behind, that I could throw it away or keep it, whatever I wanted. His tone suggested he knew exactly what I had found and did not want to discuss it. When I said I thought maybe I should call the police, he got defensive, said there was no need to involve authorities over some old notebook, that it would just create unnecessary complications. That response made me more suspicious, so I did what anyone would do in 2021. I Googled Miranda Hoffman Nanaimo. The results made my blood run cold. Miranda Hoffman had been a 17-year-old high school student who disappeared from her home in August 2003. Her body was found 3 weeks later in the woods about 10 kilometers from her house. Cause of death determined to be strangulation. The case generated significant media attention at the time but went cold within a year. Police had interviewed family members, friends, and neighbors, but no arrests were ever made. The house where she lived with her parents was my rental house. I immediately contacted the RCMP and reported what I had found. 2 officers came out that same day, took the diary as evidence, and asked permission to inspect the wall cavity more thoroughly. What they found over the next several hours was devastating. In addition to the diary, there were other items sealed in the walls. Photographs of Miranda that appeared to have been taken without her knowledge, some through windows, some at school, dozens of them showing someone had been stalking her. A jewelry box containing items reported missing from her room after her disappearance. And, most disturbing, Polaroid photographs that appeared to be from the crime itself, showing Miranda bound and terrified, proving whoever killed her had documented their crime. The lead detective, a woman named Detective Sarah Chen, who had worked on the original case as a junior officer, was visibly shaken when she saw what had been hidden in the walls. She said the house had been searched thoroughly in 2003 after Miranda's body was found, that forensics teams had gone through every room, but they had not found these items. Whoever hid them must have done so after the initial investigation, possibly during the renovation that happened before the house was sold in 2005. The detective said they would need to treat my house as a crime scene, that I would need to find somewhere else to stay while they conducted a thorough search. Over the next 2 weeks, forensics teams essentially took apart sections of my rental house. They found more hidden items in other wall cavities, all carefully sealed and concealed in ways that would not be discovered during normal living or even typical renovation work. They found clothing that had been reported missing, personal effects, and more photographs. They also found something that changed the entire direction of the investigation: a driver's license for a man named Robert Brennan, who had been a neighbor of the Hoffman family in 2003. Detective Chen explained that Robert Brennan had been interviewed during the original investigation as part of the neighborhood canvass, but he had not been considered a suspect. He was a married man in his 40s, worked as a contractor, lived 2 houses down from the Hoffmans, and had no criminal record. After the murder, he had moved away from the area within 6 months, divorced his wife, and eventually settled in Alberta. Police at the time had no reason to connect him to Miranda's disappearance beyond being a neighbor, but finding his driver's license hidden with the evidence suggested he was not just involved, but had kept trophies from the crime concealed in the Hoffman house, probably hidden during the renovation work he did for the new owners in 2005. The RCMP reopened the case officially in January 2022, now with substantial new evidence. They tracked Robert Brennan to a small town in Alberta, interviewed him, and brought him in for questioning. Initially, he denied everything, said his old driver's license must have been lost and planted by someone else. But forensic analysis of the hidden items connected him through fingerprints and DNA. Some of the photographs had his fingerprints on them. DNA evidence on items of Miranda's clothing matched his profile. The case that had been cold for nearly 20 years suddenly had a viable suspect and physical evidence. Brennan was arrested in February 2022 and extradited to BC to face charges. The media coverage was intense, bringing up the old case, interviewing Miranda's family, who had lived for nearly 2 decades without answers, and examining how the original investigation had missed evidence that was literally hidden in the walls of the victim's home. The Crown charged Brennan with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other offenses related to the crime. His trial was set for September 2022. Meanwhile, I was living through my own nightmare. The house I had rented innocently was now synonymous with one of Vancouver Island's most notorious unsolved murders. My landlord, Greg Morrison, admitted under police questioning that he had known about the house's history but was not legally required to disclose it to tenants. He had purchased the property in 2015 as an investment, renovated it cosmetically, and had been renting it out for years without telling tenants what had happened there. Previous tenants had complained about strange feelings or moved out quickly, but Morrison had never disclosed why the property had such high turnover. I broke my lease in February, citing the trauma of living in a murder house and discovering evidence of a 20-year-old crime. Morrison tried to keep my security deposit, claiming I had damaged the walls during my amateur renovation, but my lawyer argued that any damage was superseded by the fact that Morrison had fraudulently concealed material information about the property. We settled out of court, and I moved to a different rental in Nanaimo, this time making sure to research the property history thoroughly. The trial began in September 2022 and lasted 6 weeks. I was called as a witness to testify about discovering the hidden evidence, about the condition of the items, about the timeline of discovery. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to the details of what Miranda went through was traumatic. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence that Robert Brennan had been stalking Miranda for months before her disappearance, that he had used his access as a contractor to hide evidence in the walls after the initial investigation, and that he had kept trophies of his crime concealed for nearly 2 decades. The defense tried to argue that the evidence had been planted, that someone else had hidden those items in the walls, but the forensic evidence was too strong. DNA, fingerprints, and the fact that Brennan had worked on the house during the exact period when the items would have been hidden all pointed to his guilt. Miranda's parents testified about the loss they had endured, about 2 decades of not knowing what happened to their daughter, about the agony of living with unanswered questions. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges. Robert Brennan was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole for 25 years in November 2022. He is now 62 years old and will be 87 before he is even eligible for parole. Miranda's parents attended the sentencing, and afterwards, her mother thanked me publicly for finding the evidence that finally brought their daughter's killer to justice. She said the not knowing had been worse than any truth could be, and that at least now they could have closure. But I do not have closure. I still have nightmares about opening that wall and finding that diary. I think about how many people lived in that house over 19 years, walked through rooms where evidence of a murder was hidden just behind the drywall. I think about Miranda, about what she went through, about her last moments. And I think about Robert Brennan, living his life freely for 2 decades while Miranda's family suffered, secure in the belief that his trophies were hidden too well to ever be discovered. I still live on Vancouver Island, but I moved to a newer building where I know the history of every wall. I cannot live in older houses anymore, cannot renovate or open up walls without feeling that anxiety return. The case made national news, and sometimes people recognize my name and want to talk about it, want details about what it was like to discover evidence in a cold case murder. I tried to redirect the conversation back to Miranda, to remembering her as a person who deserved justice, not as just a cold case that got solved. The house where it all happened was demolished in 2023. Miranda's parents bought it from Morrison at a reduced price, tore it down, and planted a memorial garden on the property. It is open to the public now, a quiet place with a bench and flowers where people can sit and remember Miranda Hoffman, a 17-year-old girl whose murder finally got justice after 20 years because someone decided to hang some shelves and discovered what had been hidden in plain sight all along.